just an ambulance. It just flies, and so not a big deal. I'm sitting in my operations center. I have a bunch of captains who have like 5 to 7 years of experience, a bunch of enlisted folks, about 10 to 15 years of experience, and we're just monitoring all of our stuff. So think about being in a SOC or some kind of operations cell, just monitoring what's going on. Again, not a big deal. Great normal day until about 11:15. When we get a medical evacuation request from northern Afghanistan, again, not a big deal. Do it all the time. The aircraft take off. They show up. And have you ever heard of the term hot LZ? Like you ever watched a movie and hot LZ or hot landing zone? That means something bad is happening. That means that when the helicopters go to where they're supposed to go, that they're being shot at. That's like a bad day. Just a normal bad day. It's worse in a medical evacuation aircraft because they don't have guns on them, because they can't because of the Geneva Convention. That makes it a worse day. So I'm 500 miles away in my operations center, watching this go down. They are 500 miles away in northern Afghanistan, dealing with the situation, and the person who's actually managing the fight, so to speak, is a 19-year-old private first class. She'd only been in the Army 18 months, but she's in charge. So my officers, who are really smart, are really trying to mess with this individual, asking her a lot of questions as these aircraft are trying to land and save lives. At that moment, I have to stop my team and just say, shut up, stop. She has the fight. She has the fight. The 19-year-old is in charge. Well, fast forward. Fortunately, everyone gets saved. They save 8 German soldiers. They get the second highest medal given by the German government, and the 19-year-old was in charge. What organization on the planet gives 18 to 24-year-olds the kind of responsibility to save lives and be in charge when crisis happens? Your U.S. Army, anyone in the Department of Defense, we do it every day. And so over the course of this talk, we're going to share with you a couple of frameworks that drive an organization to move in the same direction, 1.2 million people, same way, every day around the globe, and how we empower others and develop trust in order to be able to put a 19-year-old in charge when it really matters and lives are at risk.
So the talk is titled From the War Zone to the Cyber Trenches, What Leaders Need to Know. You are the leaders of this community, this discipline. We're the ones who are making the decisions. We are that 18, 19-year-old, or in my case, just a little bit older than that, who need to be empowered or empower people to make decisions. So as we get started, you're going to hear some practical things we've done, and all of us are now in different positions. We're no longer in service except for one of us, and we're now applying that to a higher level discussion to enable cybersecurity. So let's start with some introductions, and we'll start with Chris. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm Chris Kubecka, and I deal a lot in the cyber warfare space when dealing with nation-state incident management, and also dealing with a strategy between the European Union, the US, and now, because the United Kingdom is separate, also the United Kingdom, because we're major trading bloc partners. If one particular ally falls, that can affect the rest of the allies' supply chain. Think about things that are going on with coronavirus right now, where certain things are in short supply because production has been lowered in China and other places in the world, especially like Germany too. So that's my particular space, and one of the things that I did previous to setting up my own company was I was the person that Saudi Aramco called after they were hit with a cyber warfare attack by the Iranians in 2012 called the Shamoon attacks. And I had to apply a lot of my background from the military to an extremely major international incident to try to reestablish, which I did, their international business operations and scramble teams.
Heiss.
My name is Colonel Heiss Gibson. I'm a U.S. Army officer, active duty. I'm a helicopter pilot by training. I've served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Germany, Korea, with an operational assignment as a battalion commander in the 82nd Airborne Division. I'm currently an academy professor at the United States Military Academy, where my expertise is where operational effectiveness intersects with human capital development. I teach system engineering, focus around the idea of systems thinking. How do you deal with ambiguity? How do you deal with crisis? And just excited to just share.
I'm retired Army Colonel J.C. Vega. I'm executive security advisor now in the private sector. Been in the military for 30 years, one of the founders of the cyber career field and the Army Cyber Institute, and I've been doing cyber before cyber was cyber. Competed in CTF at DefCon, the Lexus Park, way back when, and now I'm just happy to be here and share some of these experiences with you. And so let's start with Chris. You talk about dependencies and safety. What about it? How does that translate between the military and what we're doing now?
Well, shortly after I joined Aramco, very shortly after, we had a different type of crisis where a nation state actually leveraged our central antivirus system to try to get into a joint venture that happened to involve a nuclear facility, a nuclear power plant. And this particular adversary used us as that pivot point. We were not the direct target. And at the same time, as this was going on, there were also minor acts of terrorism going on in the particular country where this joint venture was located. So I quickly had to select the people that could go out to that country and had the capability to go on the ground and assess the incident, and at the same time keep back and figure out different crisis management plans, because we also had a lot of employees in that particular country, and we had to be very concerned with them and their families to make sure that we could get them out of that country as quickly as possible. And if this particular nation state also took out our telecommunication systems in that area and also for that country, we had to have alternate communications. But because of the seriousness, I thought, well, you know, I mean, gosh, shouldn't I go? But at the same time, I need to empower that individual that I'm sending out, because I can't do everything at all. But here is a major issue where we're talking about a nuclear facility where people can get hurt. We're talking about acts of terrorism where people can get hurt. And we need to make sure that we're kept as safe as possible. And one of the issues that we now face when it comes to digital security is it isn't just a breach of a database or a problem with your antivirus. What if a nation state uses your central antivirus system against you and causes a real safety issue? So that's basically my major concern with digital security right now.
And I think that's a great point, because if we look at how we operate and how we're going to operate in the future, that vulnerability aspect around all of our systems is a real thing that we train for every day. There's a place not too far from here in Louisiana where it's called the Joint Readiness Training Center. Every month, your Army is practicing, and we practice war, how to prosecute it. And it's a very intense environment. And we test these vulnerabilities on a daily basis to see how units react, and then how do we improve. And so this is very similar to how you may need to operate within your own organizations or your own personal perspective. How are you training yourselves to deal with issues of vulnerability? Are you actually testing the wire, so to speak, to find out where the fragility exists in order for you then to be better the next time you're hacked?
You know, you mentioned, Chris, that you weren't the target, you were the pivot point. So the idea that we have this interdependency, this connectedness, that I may not be the intended target, but I'm being used by somebody else because I'm not important. I'm no one, or my system is not relevant, but in fact it is, because other people understand our network better than we do. And the fact that translates from digital, from zeros and ones to kinetic impact. I remember more than a decade ago, there was no proven instance, public, where a cyber attack had any kinetic effect. That is yesterday. So, and Heis, you mentioned in your discussion this concept of how we're organized and how you trained and prepared for this 19-year-old. Can you get into that some?
Sure. The idea that the framework that we leverage in the military that moves, no matter what service you're in the same direction of provide that unit of effort, is called mission command. I would say that we came up with it all by ourselves, but we borrowed it from like Napoleon in 1806. And so the idea of mission command is this idea of central command, decentralized operations. Why is that important? Because what we learned from Napoleon is that when he was being pressed and was put in a situation where there was a two-front war, and he's outnumbered 2-1 by the Prussians, he actually won. And when Clausewitz unpacked what actually happened during these battles, he found that Napoleon's soldiers and officers could operate in a manner and execute his intent without him being there. If we think about 1806 or so, there's no Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Slack. So how is it that those officers and soldiers could operate with only his intent and develop a situation in real time in order to leverage and exercise discipline initiative? That's where mission command comes from. There's an art side to it and a science. The art is soft. As an engineer, that's soft stuff. Nothing against anyone who has an awesome liberal arts education, but art, to me, I'm not artistically inclined like my daughters are. So the idea of building mutual trust, that's a principle. The idea of exercising discipline initiative. There is indiscipline initiative. But for instance, my 19-year-old PFC, private first class, exercised discipline initiative when given charge of that major issue on April 10th, 2010. The idea of how do you communicate? Providing some kind of mission orders. We communicate in a very specific way in the military. If you talk to anyone who says op-ord, operations order, they understand the information that's about to come to them. That's a way to communicate. Creating shared understanding. And then this idea of prudent risk. You only accept the risk based on your boss. But there is prudent risk based on your experience. And then the last thing is this idea of commander's intent. Why are we doing something? What's required to do something? And how do you want this thing to end? Those are the principles which drives what we do. And each of those principles is a class by themselves. But that's how we are able to drive 1.2 million people, same way, same day, 24/7, and empower others to get things done without any issue.
You know, that's real good insight that you have there, how we have this framework, and the way I've adopted that commander's intent in the cyber world is from a compliance perspective. I was in charge of a major network for the largest fighting organization in the Army, and I was told to accredit the network. And there was a checklist that went on for days. And I asked my leadership, what do you want? Do you want an accredited network or do you want a secure network? Because they're not the same thing. Tell me what your commander's intent is. What do you want? Because I only have the resources to do one. But having that clear guidance and me able to communicate that back to him in his language that he understood, I was able to make advances on both sides. And while we accomplished both, they were not in the order that he anticipated. And it took us longer than they had anticipated. But the idea of understanding those differences, it really helps to have a framework that you can follow, that you all have a common knowledge of.
When I was at Aramco, I was in charge of basically trying to ensure that the oil kept flowing, that someone couldn't remotely shut it off. Someone couldn't affect a supply chain around the world for a shortage of petroleum, forcing the price to go up and very possibly affecting a lot of different countries and communities. And knowing exactly what the company wanted me to do and their intent was extremely empowering, and I was able to put that back to the people who worked under me to also empower them by making sure that they knew what the intent was. They had to act very, very quickly. We were constantly attacked every single day by one nation state or another nation state or a hacktivist group, or because we processed a lot of money, very, very, very sophisticated cyber criminals and gangs. And in order to be effective at what we were doing, we had to be empowered, and the people under me also had to be empowered to know that they didn't have to make 20 different phone calls to shut off a segment of a network, that they just did it and then would communicate what was going on if they saw something that was at a very high risk. And that's one thing that I don't see very often in a lot of organizations, is empowering individuals who have to act very, very quickly.
So, as we talk about these frameworks, and you talked about the Joint Readiness Training Center and being able to act quickly, it reminds me of this concept that we use called train like you fight, fight like you train. So here's my no joke, there I was story. I'm sitting there preparing this organization to go to Iraq. We're about to close Iraq down. We're the second top priority in the Army in the DoD for network support. And we're getting ready to deploy. The only other unit that has a higher priority is the one that's in there that we're replacing. We're doing our final test and evaluation, our major exercise, and I get a call from an outside agency that says, there's something on your network. It's doing these things. It's beaconing, calling home, going down this IP address, these port numbers, and it's scanning everything. What does that mean? We're trying to figure it out. I have all my experts here. I have a green team, a blue team, and a red team. We all know what a red team is, right? A red team is someone who's aggressing you, so we're being tested on our network. The blue team is someone who's helping us fix things. They're extra help to help us get ready, and the green team is the one who is advising us. They're experts who are sitting side by side. This call was on our secret network, and this wasn't something that was scripted or something we expected, so I immediately call everyone, is this part of the exercise? No, it's not. Oh, okay, so we really have something going on here. Someone is testing us. This is a closed network. You're not supposed to be in here. And then my chief warrant officer comes up and says, hey, we got a problem. What? Remember the one computer they told us? It's now 2. It's now 4. It's now 16, 32, 64. Holy cow. What's going on here? So I immediately go to our chief information officer. I was a CISO. This is before the CISO reports to the CIO in Army speak. The security guy works for the G6, and then he reports up to the general. And I told the general, I said, sir, or the G6, the CIO, sir, you need to let the general know who owns the network, what's going on, and my recommendation is that we shut the network down. We're in the middle of a major exercise across the country, talking to units in country, and all these things are coordinating. What do you think he said to me? I'm not telling him. You tell him. That gave me a lot of confidence in what we had going on here. I did end up telling him. And he turned to me and he said, shut it off, let me know what your next steps are going to be, and when you have your next update. And he went about his business. It didn't stop there. I'm in a major installation. I called every major command that was there and all the experts that we knew in the network. Hey, this is what I'm seeing. We can't figure it out. Can you guys help us out? Everybody said, we've never seen this either. This is new to us. You know, the concept of, you know, getting the IOCs and all those things here and sharing them and all that stuff were new concepts. So I sent up a red star cluster. That's the help anybody around, I need help. And in this case here, the Army Computer Emergency Response Team, the ARCERT, was something relatively new. Called them, said, I need help. Their response was, we got this. Pull out the hard drives, FedEx them to us, and we'll let you know if there's anything of interest. We're going to war. This isn't our life, this isn't our career, adulthood lifetime. Yeah, it's real comforting. What we realized then, and that was when I really put on my evangelist hat saying we got to change this in the Army. And we've done a lot of things since then, and people in this room have been a part of that journey in changing the Army and changing the armed forces. So thank you all, because a lot of you have had a significant impact on this. But the important thing is, I realized then that had we not trained like we fight like we train, we would not have realized that there is no cavalry out there. You got what you got. You know, they said you don't go to war with the team you want or the army you want, you go to war with the one you have. Ours was lacking. And so you have to practice in that environment, because when this really does happen and what you expect and what you're going to get, there may be a significant delta.
I think it's very, very important to stress practicing things. Now, when you practice something, it's not going to be exactly the same as the actual incident, but there are going to be a lot of different steps that are going to be very similar. And if you don't practice, you definitely will not be prepared. From my first career in the military, I was a C5 loadmaster, and we used a lot of checklists to ensure that things were done and done safely. And one thing that we absolutely had to do without a checklist was to be able to put out an engine fire and to know the steps to do that. And it was to reach up, twist, pull. And if you didn't know that and you were tested on it, just even randomly, you could not fly for at least 6 weeks and had to basically go back for training. And of course nobody wanted that, but that helped out significantly, because one time we had an engine fire and I was in the cockpit and I instantly reached up and put that engine fire out because of that muscle memory, because knowing exactly what to do. When you have an incident, who are you supposed to call first? Do you have that information handy, immediately on your person? What are the first 3 steps that you need to take? And to get that into your muscle memory, and also practice it to make sure that numbers are working and things of that nature. So it's very important to do these things.
And I think your idea of reps is very, very important. And the understanding that it's not through serendipity that you're going to be able just to react when it happens. It's as if you like any sports, if you're like any kind of sports team, they just don't show up in the championship game. There's a lot of practice that happens, a lot of games that happen, and you can actually create those kind of game situations in your own organizations or through your own processes to ensure that when things happen, you have that muscle memory. Because minus that, you're just trying to figure things out, and then that's when you realize your process, your plan is flawed, and your people are not equipped to deal with the situation at hand.
One of the worst things that can occur when you've got a major issue going on within your organization when it comes to some sort of digital attack is what happened with Saudi Aramco when they were attacked for Shamoon. They had no paper copies for contact lists. Everything was on the SharePoint. The SharePoint was wiped out. They did not have regular phones. They had voice over IP phones. Those were wiped out. They had to disconnect from the internet. They lost the vast majority of their computers, about 85% of their computer systems. They had never practiced. They never thought that it would be a risk. And it cost, we estimated, around, I would say, $7 to $9 billion to recover that company. How many of your organizations have 7 to 9 billion? And if not, how many jobs would be lost, and how many organizations would be basically plummeting to the ground on fire, like if it was an aircraft, if you didn't know at least the first steps on what to do or who to call. So it's something to definitely keep in mind.
So you talked about the having that plan and those, some of those things are dependencies. And we have a plan at almost all of our organizations. Call it a playbook, call it a standard operating procedures, call it a response plan, whatever it is. But what's your part of the plan? And can you do those steps without having to go to the book that may not be where you think it is? It may be digital and it's not accessible. And so what I often ask a group of executives is, who are you going to call outside of your organization? What's their phone number? When's the last time you talked to that person? And have you interacted to where they know, back to the train like you fight like you train, you know what capability and capacity they have, and you know what you have or don't have. And are they going to fulfill that need? So if you have someone on your incident response who's on retainer, are you their number one when you call them, or are you their number 3, number 4, number 5? What is that response actually going to look like? Have you practiced that?
And so as you're hearing, and as you all know, I mean, you're living in a VUCA world. When I say VUCA, a vulnerable, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environment. And what we've described is what's required in this VUCA world is that what I would call operational leadership. So not only understanding technology, but you also have to understand process. You also have to understand your people. And a couple of things you've heard already, there's great technology, but was there a plan? There's great technology, but we had no process to execute the plan. There's great technology, there's no process, there's no way to execute the plan. Oh my gosh, my people aren't trained on that. And so the point is that the idea of operational leadership helps bridges the gap. So you can have this lofty vision and idea, you can have some things you have to do, but if you don't understand how to bridge from lofty idea to getting things done, there's a huge blind spot. That by understanding, I would argue, operational leadership, the intersection between technology, process, and plans, allows you to be able to bridge the gap to ensure that you're prepared when the crisis happens, not if.
I think it's also very important to stress that when, because nowadays, does anyone here in this room think that their data has never been breached? Nobody. Because almost every single organization has gone through something like that. Our data is all over the place, just about everywhere. So we used to think years ago that it was something rather exotic to experience a major incident, and now it's just another very small news item that you might see on Twitter or on the internet or whatever, and you just shrug it off because it happens so often. Yet, so few organizations actually prepare for something that they should know by now will happen.
So to go back to Napoleon and kind of transition a little bit here, he has a quote that I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember it exactly, but he says, if it appears that I know what you're doing before you do, or that it appears that I have your plan, it is because I have rehearsed it and gone over in my mind all the possibilities. So what we call that is intelligence preparation of the battle space, or intelligence preparation of the battlefield. And there's several parts to that. And it's a process that we use. And the idea behind that is to analyze the threats that are out there. So the enemy. What are they likely to do? What is their MO? How are they likely to do it? What's their motivation? What's their most likely activity or action? What tools do they use? What processes do they use so that you have as good of understanding about them as you possibly can? Just like you study a fighter, just like you study your opponent on a football team. You know they're a running team. You know they're a throwing team. I'm going to prepare my defenses against them based on everything that I can possibly know. But it doesn't stop there. That preparation includes look at the friendly environment too. Look at all the assets you have available to you. I'm sure most of you here have responded to some type of crisis in your life personally or professionally. And I would guess that most of you, if not all of you, required some outside assistance of some sort. You didn't solve this crisis by yourself. You had to reach out. So the idea of looking at the assets you have available to you, if you think of if you're a large organization, you have your team that you're a part of, that you work in, day out. But expand that out. What are the directorates or divisions that are left and right of you? What do they bring to your fight if this was a crisis? Now look outside of that. Look at a coordinated response if it's larger than that. We work with New York City, and they have this organization called the CCSI that's a bunch of critical infrastructure groups that come together and they train about a couple times a year with my organization. And it's the private sector and it's the public sector, from the DA, law enforcement, fire department, Department of Energy, other private sector elements to include banking, energy there, Con Ed's a private sector. They all come together and they practice how they would actually respond to a crisis that was at the scope bigger than themselves. And how would they leverage that? And the idea is to identify the capability of capacity of the threat, the capability and capacity of your partners or those you have dependencies are, and the last part, what is your true capability and capacity? Know yourself. If you have the possibility where you could handle all of these things if they happen separately, but if they all came at you at once, you could only really address maybe one or two or three of those things, but you can't do that. So you have to know, when do you need help? What's that trigger? And practice that in advance so that when you call and you reach out, you know how you're adding value to your team, how they're augmenting, not making it more difficult. And that includes your state, local, and federal for some of you. And I know there are some feds in here. I know who you are. They are there. They do want to help you. They can help you more in advance of a crisis than after. We'd like to think as you train and prepare for your crisis as if it's a Super Bowl. Every possible element that you can control and influence, you did. But if you wait till the time of the crisis to prepare, it's going to turn out more like a pickup game. Whoever's on the playground at that time, and the best play you could run is go 10 steps, turn around, I'm going to throw the ball at you. And this may be a career-ending, a monumental experience for your organization that for some, they will not survive the post-crisis response.
And I think something that's important that causes highlight is the idea of practice and planning. And in my travels over the past couple of years talking to startup founders and tech companies, process is sometimes like kryptonite to the startup founder. The idea of process will impede my ability to innovate. America is made up of a lot of small companies. You cannot scale if you do not have process and planning. And so although all of us have military backgrounds, we practice and plan a lot about a lot of different things because the price is pretty high. You have folks who are deployed around the globe right now to allow us to sit right here just to have a conversation. But they've practiced a lot, so we're not really worried about it. But the same thing applies to you and your organizations. The willingness and desire and focus to practice and plan will allow you to mitigate the reputational risk when bad things happen. Because when something bad happens in all of our organizations now, the ability to throw out a tweet, put it on the Facebook, Instagram, and have some kind of impact on the market of your stock price, if you're a publicly traded company, is pretty high. Or the reputational risk when something bad happens will impede your ability to get more business is high. However, you can mitigate that just by taking a moment, taking some time, and practice and plan and ensure that your people are prepared when something happens.
So, how many of you think favorably about Boeing right now? Right? Nobody really, a couple of, yes, right? Right? And because of safety issues caused by software coding errors, over 350 people died. And they were doing a promoted tweet highlighting some of their accomplishments, and I noticed that, I took a screenshot of it, nobody retweeted it, and there was only one reply of, can't believe you're a major defense contractor, why don't you figure out how to make your civilian aircraft safe before you go into the space of weaponized aircraft. And their reputation hit has been quite big. And that can happen to any company. My favorite example is on the Urban Dictionary, there used to be up there a word called Aramco, right? Because their lack of preparation and the fact that they almost got obliterated, you don't want to get Aramco. And nobody wants their organization to have an Urban Dictionary entry like that.
I think are we coming to an end?
We still have a few minutes.
Okay. I just wanted to leave something before we. The thing that I'd like for you to think about is this: the last thing I shared with Mission Command, the idea of commander's intent. So there's a lot of things that we've talked about, but the bottom line is that those who are in leadership positions or in managerial positions, and we all think we're awesome communicators, but we all are challenged in that. And so if we're honest with ourselves, we have very smart people that we work with and great teammates, but if they don't know why we want something done, you can't get it done. If they don't know the key things that are required to get things done, they can't get things done. And the last part is the end state. When we say end state, well, how do you want the chapter to end? And most leaders don't like providing end state, I'll say civilian leaders, because it causes accountability to themselves. Because if I tell you how I want it to end, if you get there, no matter how you do it, I cannot hold you accountable because we're winning. But if I tell you, I'll know it when I see it, I'm now not accountable as the leader. And so this idea of commander's intent is kind of drilled into how we operate, because for every operation we do, we have to provide our organizations a leader's intent. We have to think about why are we doing something, what's required, and how do we want it to end. And by doing that, folks can exercise discipline initiative, they can be empowered, and you as a leader do not have to be in the room. You just know that the team is going towards this direction. They may go straight, they may deviate, they may go up, they may go down, but as long as they get to the end, really don't care. But that's the important thing of commander's intent, and that's something that you can walk away with. And you probably already do it in your own way, in your own lexicon, within your own organizations. We in the military have just codified it in a very rigid way so that it could be leveraged across multiple organizations, so that we all are speaking the same language. And so it doesn't matter if it's a naval officer, a Marine, an Air Force person, or even the Coast Guard. We're all speaking the same language.
When I think about digital security, I think about can it lead to someone dying? Can it lead to a situation where the supply chain is cut off? And something that can start as what one might think is a simple breach can turn into something very major. 2014, the Saudi Arabian embassy of The Hague was hacked by an insider with diplomatic immunity who had ties to ISIS. And there was an extortion demand all the way up to $50 million, or that individual and the terrorist group would blow up a national landmark and was threatening to kill over 400 people just because someone left the password of 123456 could have led to the death of over 400 people. So we have to start thinking of the very real fact that our modern world is now digital. And that means from safety systems to terrorist groups being able to leverage things and kill actual people. So when I, again, want to stress, if you are not practicing and you're not prepared at a minimal state, that could very, very, very well happen. And you might not be the target, you just might be the pivot point, but they're going to remember what happened, and you might no longer have that organization.
So we talked about a lot of different, some principles, some buzzwords, some catchphrases, you know, train like you fight, fight like you train. But I want to leave with a takeaway here, is that your response, your coordination, your plan, the execution of that is going to move at the speed of trust. The trust that your people have in you, that you have in others, that is developed in advance. I attend a lot of events, and I mentor a lot of different groups and individuals, senior and junior, on what do you do at an event? Why do you go to these events? How do you manage, how do you maneuver in an event like this or ShmooCon? How do you do that? Here's how you do it. And I always tell them, the most important thing or outcome that you're going to get from that conference is not going to be from the people on the stage. It's going to be from the people sitting left and right of you. This is the cavalry. The relationships that you're going to make at a conference like this with people who have a common belief system that security matters, the people who are going to respond to your crisis, it's going to start, I used to say, with a handshake. Now it's a fist bump or an elbow bump or an ankle tap or toe tap. But that happens here. I just met an individual today, Tom. Turns out we actually met at a conference that we were both giving in South Korea 3 years ago. And our conversation went from, you know, small talk to, oh yeah, now we're bros. And a lot of you that I met in here, or I know, I met at another event, and the time it takes to develop that trust is over a long period of time, not a one and done. So what I challenge you with this conference and others like this is when you leave here, to accelerate that speed of trust in your organization, your professional and personal life, is get a few contacts from here and follow up. Follow up on something meaningful. Have something to offer, because you never know when that will come back in spades. You'd be surprised how much someone is willing to help you when they believe in you. And sometimes in our business, lives do depend on it. And as Chris highlighted, that digital world is turning into the physical world, and all of us are touching and are affected by it. So I think we have time for a couple of questions if anybody wants to ask. And I think there's microphones left and right, so if you don't mind getting to a microphone.
There we go. I come from other branches, and now I work with a new branch, and they have recently got a new CIO who said that they're woefully inadequate in their management of cybersecurity and IT. So I wanted to hear from all three of you, knowing coming from Army and coming from other branches who have solved a lot of these problems, what best advice could you give to this other branch to help catch up in relation to the problems that I described before? So you could probably put it together as to which branch I'm talking about, but yeah.
I don't know, because we've all been there.
Sure.
And I'd like to say that the Army advanced tremendously. We did it we were the last ones to create a cyber branch, a cyber career field. And I say out of the Army, Air Force, and Marines are part of the Navy, so but the Navy, we were the last ones. We were woefully inadequate. First thing we did is we went to the other branches and said, what did you guys do right? What did you do wrong? We want to learn from you. We don't want to make the same mistakes you made, and where there's a great return, the low-hanging fruit, the quick wins, what can I do right now?
Right.
And so we reached out to our peers. I mean, at this conference here alone, there's people in here who I've already reached out to, hey, I got this one challenge. You already know that. That's going to take you 5 minutes to come up with an answer. It's going to take me a day or a week to understand even the question.
Right.
So reach out to the expertise that's out there.
Okay, thanks.
One of the things that I found very helpful during the antivirus incident was I met an individual at BSides Las Vegas, and that person was able to write me a script that could detect which computers were still left that had the antivirus version running on them that was affected. The second call that I made was to an individual I met at BSides Berlin, who, funny enough, also from West Point, who gave me tactical advice and safety advice, and also how to destroy our data as we were moving out of that country. So if you don't have the existing capability, make the contacts for the people from the right of you and to the left of you. And moving forward, build that capacity as you need it. But you're not going to have everything from day one. And foment these relationships that you're going to start today.
Nothing more to add.
If each of you had the opportunity to talk to a C-suite about implementing both IR planning and IR practice, what are the top 3 things you'd emphasize, assuming you only had 15 minutes to do it?
So in our practice, we do that. And one thing we stress is their role in this process. And what I tell them to kind of ease their anxiety of everything they need to know, and someone taught me this at one point, is I don't need you to know the answers. I need you to know how to ask the right questions, and then how to leverage, when you say a board member, the reason they're brought in is because of the strength of their network. I need you to be able to ask the right questions and how to leverage your network for the challenge that we have at hand right now. There's more to it than that, but you said, if I only had 15 minutes.
One of the things that I've done is there are many different types of crises that a company, an organization can go through. And they plan ahead already for if there's a fire or if there's a crime that is committed on a property. You might have people who are trained up for basic safety in your office that help do fire drills, for example. So if you need to plan and prepare and you need an IR plan and you need to test that out, incorporate it into some of the existing processes so that it doesn't seem super, super exotic, and especially doesn't make them think that, oh gosh, it's security related. It's just going to be a money pit that we're throwing it into. So try to incorporate it into the existing processes.
You know, that's a good point, if you don't mind, Heist, just real quick. In that crisis response, that incident response, it's a crisis. A crisis is a crisis is a crisis. There's a cyber crisis that can be an appendix to the bigger crisis. There's the fire crisis. There's other types of things. The response, the whole of organization is the common denominator there. What you're going to do for a cyber crisis, that's part of that plan, but the board has to be involved. If they're involved in a crisis of natural disaster, then they should be involved in this too.
And just to reinforce that, it's reminding, I'll use the board members that the incident response, cyber, IT is, as we think about the folks who sit on boards currently, might have thought of IT as this thing in the corner. Fix my computer, fix my Outlook, run the database. That is not what it is. It's a business function. And so it should be treated as such. And I think by ensuring that they take that idea and remind them that it's just as important as finance, operations, marketing, and sales, it'll make more sense to them. And then thrusting them, I'd recommend that they get thrusted into their own individual incident response so that it becomes real, so that they can better ask the appropriate questions, so they can better coach the executive teams on how to deal with this when it happens, before the government gets involved and forces fiduciary responsibility for having a cyber expert to sit right next to them.
Any other questions? Didn't get the tail wag. Well, thank you all for coming out here, and Chris for inviting us to, Heist and I, to join you on this panel. Thanks, everybody.